Our next speaker is Jessica Saunders, who's a senior criminologist at the RAND Corporation. She has over 15 years of experience doing research related to the criminal justice system and juveniles as well. She's led several large-scale criminal justice and prevention evaluation efforts, including the National Institute of Justice's Predictive Policing evaluation. So please welcome Jessica.
Hi. So about 8 years ago, the National Institute of, oh no, I always do this by accident. The National Institute of Justice decided that there was a new thing called predictive policing, which is basically trying to anticipate crimes before they happen and then prevent them. So like Minority Report, but a little less sexy because it was algorithms instead of precogs. So at this point, nobody knew what it was. It was all very vague. So they funded 7 different police department researcher teams to come up with this new thing that was going to solve all of our crime problems, and we were hired to do the evaluation across it. So the different departments and academics came up with a wide range of different applications. We can try to anticipate geographical and spatial, that's the same, and temporal crime variations. So we think that this 7-Eleven is going to be robbed tomorrow at 7 p.m. Or we can try to figure out who is going to be robbing that 7-Eleven. Or we can try to figure out who's going to be the victim of a crime. Some other applications were trying to link past crimes that had happened with one another by using AI to go through criminal files to try to see patterns within them. So using these statistical methods to predict something, and then we should have something to connect to it, some sort of intervention or prevention mechanism to keep it from happening. So, your microphone. Sorry. It was my hair. That's a lot to say. I'm going to tell you about 2 of the experiments that we ran in the field. One is a geographic one, and one is a person-based one. So in Shreveport, Louisiana, where I got to spend a lot of time, they tried to figure out when and where crime was going to happen. And so they came up with a model that looked a lot like a hotspot map. Maybe you guys have seen these before. It's a map of a city with red where crime has happened and green where it hasn't. And so instead of looking retroactively at what had already happened, trying to predict what does happen. So you can see the experimental districts got these little grid squares. And so unfortunately, we could only really predict there's 60% chance of a property crime in the next month. That was as good as the model could get. And unfortunately, when you gave that to a cop, who told me, by the way, I know exactly what I'm going to do with this prediction, it's going to be amazing, nothing bad's ever going to happen. They had no idea what to do with it. They had this, they walked around, they knocked on people's doors and said, you know what, we think that there might be some crime here in the future. So needless to say, it did not work. But one thing that it did do, we found that when they were given these maps that actually told them what the crimes were the shift before and the week before, that was helpful intelligence that they were able to use. So they liked it. But it didn't actually reduce crime. Okay, Chicago, this one was quite controversial. So Chicago, you may have heard, has a bit of a shooting problem. And so what they're trying to do is understand who the shooters are. And they have gone to the epidemiological literature to see that these shootings happen within social networks, okay? The people are very connected. And when they go through the data, they can find and identify the people at the highest risk for being involved in a shooting using their connections with other people who have been involved in a shooting. So using just co-arrest records, they could see whether or not you were co-arrested with a homicide victim, so 1 degree separation, or if you were co-arrested with someone who was co-arrested with a homicide victim, 2 degrees of separation. You add up all of those links, and when you have a high number, you're at really high risk. So there were people that were 500 times more likely to be a homicide victim than the average Chicago citizen. The problem with that is that, well, it's not really a problem, but you still have a very low probability of being a shooting victim. So we identified the top 20 people in each district, gave the list to the district commanders who said, we know exactly what we're going to do, we know exactly what we're going to do. They had no idea what to do except to put their hands on them, those were the words they used, to try to surveil them more heavily. There was no reduction in crime or violence. The people who were on the list were more likely to be arrested for a shooting, but that shooting occurred before the experimental period, so it may have given them a little more leads about open shootings to look at. Okay, so what is the future of predictive policing? I'm going to predict it right now. The problem that we're facing right now is that we're getting incremental improvements in our predictions using these very advanced, sophisticated models. We can do about 11% better than we could just using the data we already had. Okay, so then you have to multiply that by how much better we're able to prevent crime, and we're lousy at it. Here we put in, like, let's pretend that we can get 50% reduction in crime. That's never happened. So we're really looking at very modest reductions in crime as it is right now. So it doesn't, whatever, if it doesn't work, that's fine. Like, let's keep trying it because any improvement is great. Well, the problem is that we're actually getting involved in like a self-fulfilling prophecy. So crime data is terrible. Okay, so less than half of property crimes are ever reported. Except for car theft, about 80% are reported, but that's the highest reporting rate we have. So we're already looking at biased data because who reports a crime is very determined by who they are. The police department, there's a lot of characteristics that we know bias that input. So if we're putting this biased data in a model, all we're doing is reinforcing it. Then we're sending police out to that area where there's been higher crime, but it's really just higher reporting. They can discover more crime. Look, we did a great job predicting. So we should be very, very nervous about putting these in the field right now, especially with the state that the data is in. Bye.